Hello, and welcome to my video about Port Washington, New York, the gateway to Manhattan and New England. Located just 17 miles east of Manhattan, it's a small hamlet made up of 12,000 residents. Not too far away from LaGuardia Community College, it can be reached by the Long Island Railroad. It stops at Flushing Main Street, Woodside, and Penn Station. Or you can get here by car or bus in just under an hour. This is Town Dock, our first stop here in Port Washington. Before our tour of Port Washington, it's important to learn a little bit about its history. This billboard located at Town Dock illustrates Port Washington's industry in the past of fishing, boat building, sand mining, and aviation. Since sand mining has shaped Port Washington and was not only Port Washington but Nassau County's biggest industry, we'll talk about that first. Here you see the sandbanks of Port Washington, over 20,000 years old. As most Long Islanders should know, Long Island was formed by glaciers. The final glacier left behind mounds of glacial sand and gravel, and companies came to Port Washington to mine that sand. Since the 1800s, it has been estimated that over 140 million yards of sand were delivered from Port Washington to New York City. Enough sand to cover the Empire State Building, with sand extending from the East River to the Hudson River and from 14th Street to 59th Street. As a student of urban sociology, we've learned that industry brings jobs. The sand pits you see here of Port Washington brought many jobs to immigrants, mostly Italians, who stayed nearby the sand mining sites or in town. The companies mining sand in Port Washington provided around 800 jobs to immigrants, including these guys. Nice suits, boys! And for those astute students, this sounds a lot like gentrification, huh? Now you'll see what happens when gentrification happens in the suburbs. For this photo, we get to play Robert Moses with an aerial view of Port Washington. Due to its proximity to New York City, sand mining in Port Washington continued well into the late 1900s. In this photo, taken in 1959, we can see some landmarks in Port Washington. Location 1 at the bottom of your screen is Mill Pond, where the landmark restaurant Gildo's or Daiwan's is now, which I'll show you later on. Location 4 at the top of your screen is Land's End, where F. Scott Fitzgerald is said to have stayed, partied, and observed the local elite while he wrote portions of The Great Gatsby. The rest of the locations on the map are schools and where the rich folks lived. For years, because of the sand mining, the film industry used this area as a backdrop for their desert scenes. But not anymore. The community of Port Washington came together in the 1990s to erect a monument for the sand miners who lost their lives. This is the Sand Miners Monument. You see immigrants who used to work at the sand mine stand behind a pair of hands, holding sand falling onto New York City. The same sand that helped build its tunnels, bridges, skyscrapers, and the subway system. Behind the monument, the development also called for a senior citizens home, a temple, golf course, and different soccer fields for kids to play. With the developments and the monument, this concludes the sand mining history of Port Washington. Heading back to our billboard at Town Dock, let's look into our aviation era of Port Washington. Wait, I'm sorry? Mayor LaGuardia, you wanted to say something?
America's transatlantic clipper is ready for the takeoff at the new seaplane base at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Thousands turn out to hear New York's fiery little Mayor LaGuardia use words that might well apply to the German Air Force zooming over Scandinavia.
The whirl of a propeller brings joy and cheer to us, while in other lands, the whirl of a propeller is a signal for underground covering and fear and destruction and death.
In the great seaplane hangar, 2 of the transatlantic clippers are open for public inspection. But the high spot of the afternoon comes with the first official transatlantic flight direct from New York to Europe. Carrying a record cargo, the clipper taxis out for the takeoff. With the inauguration of its seaplane base, New York's LaGuardia Field takes its place as the largest commercial airport in the world.
Regularly scheduled transatlantic airmail goes into service on the 12th anniversary of Colonel Lindbergh's history-making flight. 100,000 letters tagged for Europe are stowed away, and the 2 stewards and 12 flight officers, whose flying totals 1.5 million miles, take their posts. The mail bags are carried in the wing compartment. Pan American officials and New York's postmaster wish success to Captain Arthur Laporte, who is in command of the flying boat. And with a roar of mighty motors, the clipper takes off from Port Washington, headed for the Azores and Marseille. The flying boat points its propellers into the sky for a 26.5-hour hop to Europe. And an American ship, flown by an American crew, conquers the Atlantic, last frontier of commercial aviation.
Yep. Just so happens that Port Washington has a naval airport that sent the first transatlantic passenger flight of airmail from here in the U.S. overseas to jolly old England in Southampton, Great Britain. This is of such a great importance to Mayor LaGuardia that he showed up to this event. Hey there, Mayor LaGuardia, how you doing? We'll now move on to Port Washington and how the community has come together to beautify Port Washington. This community movement to clean up Port Washington from its sand mining past can be clearly seen by the Bay Walk of Port Washington. As we leave Town Dock for the Bay Walk, we'll see what Town Dock and nearby Sunset Park has to offer for the community. Looks like we made it! Just under a 5-minute walk from Town Dock and Sunset Park is the Baywalk Park in Port Washington, a community development to take back the waterfront for the residents of Port Washington. This quarter-of-a-mile walkway was helped by the New York State Environmental Protection Fund and shows Port Washington residents the dangers of pollution. But not only the dangers, how to keep Port Washington beautiful. But now you're in town. What do you do in Port Washington? God, that's awful. I apologize. If you head over to the landmark on Main Street, you'll find that you can drop off your kids, watch some comedy, or perhaps watch a musical if you'd like. If that's not your sort of thing, it's alright, you can go kayak on the Manhasset Bay. Thank you very much for watching and enjoy the following before and after photos, including this one of the landmark in Port Washington.
Wave after wave, I'm slowly drifting away. And it feels like I'm drowning, pulling against the stream, pulling against the